What's up, everybody? It's Tom from the Orange Jungle Tree Sheep. Welcome to another episode of Spiel. And my guest today is a good friend of mine who I knew briefly for a time, but circumstances were able to allow us to hang out again. So this is Alex.
Hi.
And yeah, we're going to get right into it. So for our first topic of discussion, we're going to be talking about superheroes in general, mostly a bit about the state of the MCU. So, yeah, from what you've told me, it seems like you are a pretty big fan of the Marvel stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, I've watched just about everything that there is. However, I haven't actually read all the comics, but I feel like I've learned a lot of it's on like Instagram. I mean, like you see like posts and stuff, and so I feel like I've absorbed a lot of the comics just through other people posting them. Which, I don't know how legit that is, but I know the comics at least a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's been pretty iffy recently. I mean, we talked about this earlier, but just a lot of the most recent content from the MCU at least has been alright. It's kind of hit or miss with a lot of misses.
Yeah, it's, as I've kind of said before, and just I keep thinking now, it's a mix of the release is getting messed up because of COVID, but also because some of the writing and some of the ideas that are being let through and taken to the final stages it feels like they're not hitting the right balance of the vision of the creators and the appeal to the audience, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because so much of it's already written. So like they have to toe this line between if they want to make things different or take the creative liberties, they're going to upset someone. Yeah. But if they stick too strictly to the comics, they might lose interest. And I feel like they're just not always following that line super well. But then also, like you're saying, with COVID and with the writing, it's an unfortunate time for them. I mean, I feel like they've lost a lot of potential viewers, a lot of interest in general. I mean, even people who like Marvel, I've heard a lot of people being like, no, I think I'm kind of done with superheroes for a little bit. And I'm like, well.
Yeah. The success of the MCU in the early 2010s, even though it started in 2008, it kind of brought the superhero genre back into mainstream. I think it also helped that The Dark Knight released that same year, and that was also really good. Both it and Iron Man really marked a good change for it, because a lot of live action superhero stuff, in the preceding decades, the 2000s, the 90s, was not very good.
Yep.
It was more cheaply made stuff. It's like some of the stories and ideas were good, but superheroes in general had been on the decline. The genre first got really super popular really back when it started in the 30s, 40s, and then carrying that over into the 50s and 60s. But in the late 20th century, stuff started to drop off. Comics became comics in general, not just superhero comics, became more of a kind of nerdy thing, a nerdy space of media, or at least more niche. It wasn't quite mainstream anymore.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that trend is pretty noticeable with just the transition into television, radio as a mainstream source of media. Because I mean, comics back then, if comics the only thing you have, that's the best thing you have. But then when you start transitioning to TV and radio, if you want to stay particularly relevant, often you have to adjust to that as well. But it just changing from a I mean, changing from comics to TV, especially when animation wasn't as fluid or as able to do as much, that's just such a gap that they kind of got pushed back. And when things become more niche, usually it gets that connotation of, oh, it's like nerds who do it or things like that. And I mean, you see that even in just books, like except. I mean, a lot of the older generations still view books as like, oh, this is the way to go. And I mean, it is. But like, if you read a lot of books, it's generally viewed in a positive light, but you're still kind of nerdy or you're reserved or things like that. Which isn't necessarily true, but that's just the vibe that happens.
It's the wider perception among the culture, yeah. I think it's kind of interesting to think about that nowadays, especially in mainstream awareness, when you say comics to someone, it's usually older people, our parents' generation, Gen X and older, will think of two things. A, like superheroes, and B, like actual comic strips.
Yeah.
I think there's pretty wide cultural awareness, even among people our age, of stuff like Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah.
But superhero stories have become, I think, the defining, or at least the most common thing that people think of when you say the word comic. And I don't know, it's just kind of interesting because this one setting, this one genre has really dominated the medium for a while.
Yeah, it is interesting because there's not like, it's not like there's a particular reason that like it does the best in comics. It's just where they like blew up the most.
Yeah.
And so that's just how we think of it. Like it really could have been any genre. And I mean, I think that it just worked really well for superheroes because I mean, you can do like detective shows or mystery and do stuff like that, and you can do it live action, you can do it in many different forms of media and it would look fine. But again, superheroes are just tricky because if you're using magical powers, especially in times when you don't have good like VFX, then like that is the medium that you have to use. So, I mean, I'd imagine that's why it just took over so much. I think that you see a lot of sci-fi comics as well because it's just one of the only ways that, especially back then, you could portray these things that you can't do physically. Because I mean, you watch like the first like. It's not Avengers, or maybe it is, but like where it looks like they're wearing like trash. like I know, like it's I've seen it like many times, but like it's like the Iron Man costume just looks like ridiculous. But I mean, and it's because it's just really hard to transfer over when you just don't have what we have today. And I still think it's interesting though, and worth noting, just like looking at the first Iron Man and like the VFX in that, because it looks really nice.
Yeah.
But then like looking at some of this more recent stuff, it's just not nearly as good. And so like that drop off is very interesting.
I think part of the reason the technical aspects have suffered recently, especially with a lot of the CGI and VFX, has been the fact that the company culture at Disney in particular has given people a lot more work than they can handle in a short period of time, which means that there are finished released products that in places look kind of noticeably bad.
Yeah.
The one example I think of is Thor Love and Thunder, scene I think in the middle of the movie where Heimdall's son, reaches out with like astral projection to Thor, and it's literally just his head and like a ball of orange light floating in the middle of the room, and it's just a really bad effect.
It's not even like a 3D effect. It's literally just like 2D, like somebody took like a TV screen and just went boom.
Yeah.
No, it's very, very silly. I mean, I think of it's one of the most recent like Flash movie, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, with like
a lot of this stuff.
It's sad because it's not. We have the capability to do these things, and we've shown that before.
Yeah.
But it is just, it's the culture. There's not enough time, and all these studios have been really pushing things out, and I don't know. I mean, it's just tricky to fix that, because especially now that Disney owns all these things, and just it's not great. But
yeah, it's the superhero genre saw. I mean, there were contenders other than Marvel and DC in the genre. Other companies, Image Comics is a good one. They're the ones who created Invincible and also Spawn. If you know who Spawn is,
I do not.
I'd recommend you look up some of his stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's some pretty good stuff.
Okay.
But there were others besides Marvel and DC. But the 2000s really saw a decline in those two companies in particular. The early 2000s, at least. Later on, with the release of Iron Man, also the publishing of Marvel's Civil War event, and also the release of the Dark Knight movie, those three things really got the Marvel and DC back on track. Superheroes were made mainstream again because Iron Man was so good, because the Dark Knight was so good.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the expansion and the re-entering of the genre back into popular consideration. There were places where it seems like it almost moved a little too fast, and the companies were trying to catch up and be like, we gotta capitalize on this, you know.
Yeah, and I think that especially the smaller companies just couldn't. I mean, you just can't keep up if you're focused on comics, and then Marvel's making like these AAA movies and stuff. I mean, you're still just doing comics. You're gonna kind of get buried. That's what you saw with Invincible, but then I guess I don't actually know how that worked. But then Amazon bought it and then animated it, and now it's super popular. It's very mainstream, and it's just really good. I have liked that a lot.
Yeah,
so.
The Invincible show is really good. If you out there have not watched the Invincible show, I would recommend it. If you don't have Amazon Prime, find a place that pirates things online, because it is worth your time. The Invincible comics are actually also like really good. And the thing is that they were published in the lower times for Marvel and DC. From like 2003 they started, and then they ran for a good long while. But at least they started during the down period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also just the fact that Invincible is animated and they didn't even go for a live action is really cool to see, because a lot of the stuff that you see in the show is almost not frame by frame, because it's like not possible, but like it's almost exactly taken from the comics, which is really cool. And like, I personally did not read the comics, but you can just tell that if you read the comics and you saw that, that'd be super neat. Like, it'd just be, especially if you read it when you were a kid, and then actually seeing these comics that you read page by page come to life in like with voice actors and actual like effects. It's just really cool.
Yeah. On that note, actually, I don't know if it's Invincible or something else, but I think they're making a live action movie out of it. I'm just like, I know there's a lot of people, especially older people, who aren't interested in animation really, but it's like this story doesn't need a live action adaptation.
No. And live action's great, but it really does suffer in a lot of departments. If you're not willing to pay your animators, your CGI and everything, if you're not willing to put that extra money into making it look good, it's gonna flop.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, especially when you come from an animated medium to that, you really need to be willing to make it look good, because otherwise it's just gonna be bad.
Yeah. If you're making a big budget production like that, in any genre, anywhere, you have to, if you want it to be good, you have to put in the time to make a good product. Not just the executives and the people administrating it, but they also have to allow that for their employees.
Yeah.
On a smaller scale. And
when you're coming out of animation, there's a lot of high expectations because in animation you can make anything happen. But if you're moving into a live action medium, you have to decide, are you willing to make the effects that you saw in the animation, or are you going to drop them? I mean, that's kind of, I feel like that's the same type of choice they made in, I think it was Mulan, like the live one that they did, and they just like cut several of like the characters that would have been CGI.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. It's just, our media landscape today has, honestly, in the past decade-ish, maybe a little bit more, the pace that stuff changes and trends come and go has just gotten super fast.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that really started with the internet in the 90s, but just throughout the 20th century, that's been the way things go.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen a lot of really good stuff in every medium: books, movies, TV,
Mm-hmm.
video games, music. But there's just as much that doesn't work and fades into obscurity.
Yeah.
You know, we make stories for a lot of different reasons, but not all of them are going to do well, unfortunately.
No. Because, like, even if you put your whole heart into it, you still, it's this, like, tricky thing where you could have a story in your head that you love and that you are so passionate about, but, like, and you can write it, and that's great, but, like, also, if people aren't interested in it, then it's just something for you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, that's great as well. It's just, it's hard, and I'm not a writer, but, like, one has to imagine that you have to think of so many different things when you're writing that it's not even just what do you want to make anymore, it's also how is it going to be perceived, how is your audience going to take it, will they find this interesting, etc.
Yeah. And I don't think those discussions on part of creative people I don't think they're new, but the way they happen and the careful consideration of them is what is unique nowadays. And I think that's a good segue to our second topic, unless you have anything else you want to conclude on for the first one.
No, not really.
Alright. So then the next one, we're going to be talking about the horror genre specifically, focusing on video games a little bit. But, yeah, anyways, I'm not sure I've talked about it too much on my channel before, but I'm a horror fan. More movies than anything else, less video games, but what about you?
Yeah, so I love horror movies. I love horror video games. I love it all. But I mean, to be honest, I don't play a lot of like horror games just by myself, but I feel like a lot of the defining moments in like my like early like childhood were watching, I mean, like really popular YouTubers playing these horror games, like watching Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, and it's been really cool because I think that's my favorite genre of video game, maybe along with like Sandbox, but like watching that genre grow into like what it is now was really cool. But I feel like a lot of the stuff these days has kind of been lacking, and I feel like that's because we just haven't had any huge horror games that have really shifted like the way horror is in a couple of years. But specifically, I think the biggest shift in the entire horror industry was Five Nights at Freddy's. And I feel like you can't talk about horror without talking about it. But I mean, like, so my brother and I we rewatched like Markiplier playing it, and I mean he's one of the most popular, influential people playing it at the time.
Yeah.
And it's so apparent that it was so different than anything else that he had played, and you see that along with every like YouTuber who plays it, because they're like, this is so weird, I can't move, because every horror game before that's like run away or like
when you think about, I mean, if I'll say something about that video specifically, Markiplier's very first Five Nights at Freddy's video is like almost single-handedly responsible, at least on YouTube, for kickstarting the rise of Five Nights at Freddy's. You know, he played it not too long after the game first came out, and it's still like the third or second most viewed video on his channel to this day.
Yeah.
It's like this one small little indie horror game about a security guard keeping watch at a bad Chuck E. Cheese ripoff for 5 nights.
Yeah.
While you can't move, are rooted in place, and have to defend yourself from the animatronics with the cameras, was going to be the last game of the guy who made it.
Yeah.
After he had had years of failures.
And even crazier, all those failures were a completely different genre.
Yeah.
And the people who criticized it said that it looked like scary or creepy. So he was like, yeah, alright. And then made a horror game.
Yeah.
It's just that it's very clever. Mm-hmm. And like, it's, I don't know, like, you know, keep the way that the games have kept coming out, I don't know if they've all maintained that same quality as the first game.
No.
But that first game was truly something else in that. Because, like, I remember watching that as a kid, but, like, I remember watching that in, like, middle school and just being, it was just so different. It was so crazy. I remember thinking of theories and, like, thinking about...
That's just a theory.
Yeah, exactly. I remember, like, thinking about it all, and it was just so fascinating to me. And then, like, also on that same note, another really influential game, I think, in horror was, I personally love this game, Slender: The Arrival. And that was, so, like, it was after Slender had already been out, and like 8 pages, and I think a lot of horror games at that time didn't really have that story behind them. It was just, big scary run.
Yeah, early horror was a lot of just kind of one-off kind of classic tropes, but it wasn't until the rise of the internet and the creation of characters like Slender Man and the rise of, you know, creepypastas on the internet that the foundations of horror pre-FNAF came into being. Chances are you viewer out there likely who know who Slender Man is.
Yeah.
Those games were big for a bit. Amnesia was also really huge.
Yeah, that's the other one I was thinking.
Around then. Amnesia was a, you know, horror game series from the mid to late 2000s, early 2010s. That was like a lot of cool original storytelling. Yeah, and that was it's really interesting because that also coincides with the rise of Let's Plays on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And I think Let's Plays do a lot for the horror genre, because like I said, I don't particularly enjoy playing the horror games just by myself. I also I'm not a big single player game type of person. Like, I usually only play games if it's with friends or whatnot. But Let's Plays is, I think, what really opened up some of these more niche genres, because you can watch other people play and it's funny. You watch them get scared. Maybe you get scared a little bit, but you're not alone in it, and so it removes some of that aspect. But for the person playing, it is just as scary as it would have been. And so it's just, I mean, because that's how I watched a lot of the stuff. I watched Mark playing these horror games. I mean, and going back to, like, Slender: The Arrival, it was just really neat because, especially rewatching the videos, he's constantly remarking about how, like, oh, this is so crazy, there's, like, this story going on, there's this lore, and he's like, this game is so huge, it's like 3 gigabytes. And it's really cool being able to see, like, the growth of that entire genre throughout just from that. I think the biggest horror game I play now is Dead by Daylight, but I feel like that's not particularly horror, but it's cool seeing, because like you're saying with movies and stuff, it's cool seeing all of those iconic, like, characters in the game, because I've watched all those movies as well. Yeah,
Dead by Daylight is a good mix of, like, original and non-original content.
Yeah.
Say what you want about how the game has changed and the state of play of it over the years, but I think if you're looking for, like, good mixes of original content and other ideas, it's a good game for that.
Yeah, it's really neat. And, I mean, the horror industry in movies, that was always pretty there. I mean, it's been around for a while, and so it's just really neat, especially seeing some of those classics in the game, especially when, I mean, like, I've watched them and seen them, and getting to play as them is really cool.
Yeah. I'd actually recommend a channel about horror movies specifically. Have you heard of Dead Meat?
I have not.
Well, I would recommend to you and our viewers a YouTube channel called Dead Meat that their main series is called The Kill Count. They go through a lot of popular horror movies, keeping track of the ways and number of how people are killed, but also delving into the productions of horror movies and the genre in general.
Mm.
They make a lot of good stuff. They've been around for about 7-ish years now.
Okay.
They make a lot of good stuff for horror fans on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I love horror. It's just exciting. I feel like it's really fun to watch. I'm really interested for this upcoming game with Dead by Daylight and Supermassive Games or something. Have you seen the game Until Dawn?
Yes.
It's the guys who made that and the people who made Dead by Daylight. They're making a game called the Casting of Frank Stone, maybe. But I'm super excited to see that because, I mean, for one, I like the creators of Dead by Daylight. Say what you will about I think we've done a good job so far, etc. I mean, and then also Until Dawn, one of my favorites.
Yeah.
That's one of the first games that ever made me really be like, ooh.
Yeah, Until Dawn was really cool.
Oh, it was so good. It was disturbing and scary at the same time, and I can't imagine how much scary it would be actually playing it just yourself. But I mean, like, it's just such a cool concept of a game that almost plays out exactly like a horror movie would, except you are in control of some of the aspects of it. I think that's a really cool way they did that, because it's kind of like jumping off of the horror movies and using that same type of media just with a little bit more options. That was really cool. But yeah, they're making a game together, and so it should be really cool. The trailer's already out. I definitely recommend it. It looks good. So I don't know when it comes out though, but I'm excited.
Yep.
But yeah.
Alrighty. I think horror as a genre is in kind of an interesting space, just in general, because, action and adventure, sci-fi, fantasy, mystery, thriller, slice of life, romance, comedy, are all made to entertain. Horror is made to entertain as well, but it's meant to be through the lens of fear.
Yeah.
Or at least including content that is supposed to scare us.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if you're making a horror game, you have to understand that you are instantly removing, like, I don't know, maybe 70% of, like, your potential audience, because not everybody likes horror games. In fact, a lot of people don't. And that's, like, the tricky thing is a lot of my friends do not like horror games. And so it's like, and you are choosing to, like, produce something that you know you're probably going to have less of an audience for. But, I mean, it's still so universally loved, and I think it's probably just some odd human experience type thing where we crave the adrenaline rush. We crave, and that's what you get in horror games. And so I have a feeling that if you are an adrenaline junkie, you probably will like horror games because it invokes that same type of feeling. But it's cool. I like it a lot.
Yeah. I think horror exists in a pretty unique place in terms of just storytelling in general.
Yeah.
That's why I find it so enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they're still great stories. Like, you can get so many great stories in the genre, and it just actually covers that other bit. Because a lot of the other stuff you see is either really sad, really happy, but there's that fear that is another core emotion in humans and really everything. So it's just cool. It's cool seeing it.
Yeah. All right. Then I think that makes a good transition point to our last topic. We're going to be talking a little bit about musicals and kind of live performances, that kind of story.
Yeah, so I went to a musical, well, no, I went to a school for the arts in high school and middle school, and I mean, I did theater, though I'd say I was more of a kid in theater and not a theater kid, because, I mean, I enjoy doing, like, stage plays and stuff. I like those a lot, and then the theater department was kind of like, we desperately need more guys, and I was trying to choose between guitar and theater, and I was like, well, in guitar I'd just be another member of the ensemble, but they like actually need me in theater, so that's kind of why I went with it. But really, up to that point, I did not like musicals. I like explicitly hated them. And my siblings, they'd listen to like, well, my sister really liked like Teen Beach Movie, and I used to make a big funk about how much I hated it, and I was like, it's so bad. And like High School Musical, I didn't even watch it, and I was like, I hate that. Why are they singing in the middle of school? It makes no sense. And it just drove me crazy. But then, honestly, like somewhere in the midst of high school, we did some musicals. We did like Seussical and Shrek, and I don't know. I think it was doing the musicals is what made me realize that it's actually pretty good. And I think it's it's another really unique way of storytelling. And I don't think I ever got that until that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started listening to Seussical and Shrek because I'd listened to it hundreds of times by doing them. And then I did High School Musical, and I think that's where like something flipped in my brain, and then I like hyperfixated on it, and so I listened to all the High School Musicals many times. Like my top artist for, I don't know, maybe it was 2021 was Troy Bolton. Like that's who showed up on my Spotify Wrapped was Troy Bolton.
Oh, man.
Like number 2 was the cast of High School Musical. Number 3 was it was Gabriella. So that was rough.
Wow.
Interesting time for me. And I also listen to like 80s music, but in between that, and then like freshman year, I listened to a lot of like Encanto, and then I think it was actually last year. So it was just like my junior year, I finally listened to Heathers, and I'd always heard about Heathers, especially when I was in like middle and high school, except I was still under that like, no, I don't like musicals, like cringe. and so I did not listen to them. I listened to Heathers, and I listened to it hundreds of times, like so many times. And I did the same thing with Mean Girls because Barrett Wilbert Weed was in it. And most recently, this musical called Epic, and Epic is based like fairly close, but also a lot of creative liberty on the Odyssey, with like Odysseus and Troy, and it's all really good. It's like still being made right now, and so I definitely like very heavily recommend you watch this. I truly believe this guy's gonna be like the next Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's just so good. But sorry, that was a tangent. But like back to like the general idea, I just think that musicals are a great form of entertainment. It's just really good storytelling, and I feel like the music itself can really give so much more, because and music and stuff is used in just about every genre except comics and reading. But in TV shows, there's always like ambient music. In video games, same thing, and it helps you really, really push what emotion you want people to feel when they're reading, like watching it or listening. And so the fact that musicals use that constantly, I think it can really emphasize how you should feel in a moment or what feeling they want you to get. And it's like, I feel like it's just a lot. Like, it can really force you to feel things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I like them.
Yeah, I think musicals, they also exist in kind of an interesting space because it is a live oral performance that includes segments of it where the cast is kind of breaking character, but also staying within. Like, they're straddling the line they're straddling the fourth wall.
Yeah.
That's, for anyone who isn't familiar with that expression, it's like the line between a viewer of a piece of entertainment and a character within it. Like, if you probably know who Deadpool is. Deadpool breaks the fourth wall. He talks directly to the comic readers. If you've ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Out, the movie from the 80s with Matthew Broderick, when he talks directly to the camera, that's him breaking the fourth wall. Musicals, specifically mostly when there is a song happening, they're straddling the fourth wall because in universe, in the story being told, they might not necessarily be singing, but they're definitely singing in real life. It's like, hey, these people are in school or trying to do this other thing or whatever. Why would they be singing at a time like this?
Exactly, and that's what it used to annoy me because I physically could not get over that jump. But then somewhere down the line, I don't know, it started working and I got it. It is just truly such an interesting and kind of strange mode of entertainment, especially because musicals and plays and stuff are so I mean, they just go so far back, and yet they're still such prominent forms of entertainment even this day. And arguably you could say TV shows are basically just plays. It's true, but musicals are just straight up still on the stage. It's still basically the play. And then the other thing I really like about musicals is I feel like it's also kind of piggybacking off of what were radio shows. Because I can sit in my car on my way home, listen to the entirety of Epic or Hamilton or something, especially these musicals where the songs are almost constant. Because I think Hamilton was one of the really big ones to do that, because in a lot of musicals, sometimes there's that song, just normal acting, song acting, etc. But the ones where there's less of that, which I used to hate even more, are really cool to listen to when you're trying to do stuff. Because it's basically like listening to an audiobook, except also music. Because sometimes you want to be able to dance around it, and it's just really cool. It's really unique, and so I've grown to really like musicals.
Yeah, I think, especially with how technology has progressed today, really going back to the invention of the television in the mid to late 20th century, live performances in general have stuck around, which is kind of interesting because, with how often we hear people talk about the AI apocalypse is coming, and you would think that those kind of cultural traditions would have died out already, but they stick around. Thinking about concerts, music. Those are huge nowadays. I mean, music in general has just been a cultural staple of humanity since our species originated. It's like those traditions that we have are so deeply born into our sense of just who we are and how we live that, I think we're lucky to still have a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, it really just rings true, because you could say, do you want to watch this recording of this musical, or do you want to actually go to it? And I think that most people would rather go to it. Not even because, I mean, you could even say that it's going to be the exact same audio quality, it'll be the same visual quality. Honestly, you even say, oh yeah, it's in VR, but it's recording. And I'm I still think people would prefer the live version. I don't know what it is that draws you to it. Maybe it's the fact that it's slightly different than if you listen to it. It'll always be slightly different every time. I don't know. But it's just live stuff is still so good. And I don't know if it's because we like seeing other humans or if it's just something about it. I don't know. But it's great. It's cool that it does still play such a prominent role in our society.
Yeah. We have had storytelling in some form since humans originated. I think it really comes from the fact that there is knowledge and there are ideas that we want to keep around, we want to persist, and lessons about life that we want to communicate. And there is something about the very immediate personal nature of a live performance that, as much as we can try to capture it with technology, there will probably always be something about it that remains unique.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope that going forward we can, just as a culture, we can maintain a lot of those ideas.
Yeah, I genuinely think that a lot of it will never truly go away.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you have AI that's making songs that sound almost 100% exact to human voice, you can't even tell the difference. You're still not gonna. You still want to go to the concert, and not everybody's for that. But a lot of times, if you don't want to go to a concert, it's not necessarily because you don't want to see the live stuff. It's because, one, maybe you don't like extremely loud music, or you don't like huge crowds.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest like turnoff from concerts. It's not because it's live. It's just because of how many people want to see it. If there was a smaller way to do it with live stuff, I think a lot of people would still do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just interesting because I feel like that'd be the only like argument against live music. Is like they're like, oh well, not everybody likes it. And I think a lot of people don't like it. It's not because it's live.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just cool.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider the differences in ways that, you know, people spend their time and consume entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, honestly, that's kind of one of the reasons that I decided to start the show, because I've met and talked to a lot of people who have a lot of interesting stuff to say, and nowadays I find myself in a good position to have those conversations and have them be around for people to see and for us to think about. So, you know, I'm glad we get to talk about stuff like this.
No, I think it's really cool. I think it's a cool way to show other people. I mean, because the reality is that a lot of any viewers are not necessarily going to meet either of us. So it's like, in that way, you still get a glimpse into that person's head. You get to see how they think about different things. And I think as people, we just crave interactions like that. And so it's a cool way to just show different prominent people in your life or in the world or just in general.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah. So I think that about wraps it up. Yeah, this was a really good conversation. I think just thanks for coming on, man.
Of course. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, my YouTube's been going well. I'm glad I've gotten the chance to just do stuff like this. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool.
Anyways, any viewers out there, please take any of the recommendations we made. Go check out the media and stuff that we talked about, because chances are you'll probably get something out of it. And even if you don't, you got to learn about something cool at least. But yeah, this has been another episode of Spill the Spiel. Thank you, Alex, again.
Of course.
And this has also been me, Tom, from the Orange Jungle Tree Sheep. And that concludes it. So, yeah, I hope you have a good day. Goodbye.